bedrooms meet the boardrooms, and everybody's...
You're listening to Misinterpreted, a cowpunk song from Philip B. Price's 1991 album Tender Skelter. The song was his response to the war raging in the Persian Gulf at the time. In the decades since, Philip has been the frontman and songwriter for the band Winter Pills. But back in the early 90s, he was recording songs on an analog 4-track and sharing them at open mics. And for a little while, I got to join him. In 1991, I was living in Brattleboro, Vermont. Philip, my fellow Bennington alum, was living in Keene, New Hampshire, which is just a short trip from Brattleboro across the Connecticut River. Our mutual friend Nathan Thompson suggested that we get together and make music. Philip was between bands at the time. When I was still in college, his band back then, Memorial Garage, would come play on campus. They were awesome. So when Nathan suggested that I go jam with Philip, and it turned out that he was open to the idea, I was pretty excited and also kind of intimidated. Philip was and is a master orchestrator. 2 musicians plus a 4-track recorder meant we could potentially have an 8-track arrangement. I was contributing my singing and playing wind instruments, but it seemed like it would be a good idea for me to learn electric bass. I mean, how hard could it be? Esteemed viewer, it was a spectacular failure. As I practice my guitar these days, I have been mystified by how I am not having such a hard time. Why was bass so elusive for me back then? Philip could not possibly have composed simpler and more idiomatic lines for me to play. You sold me ocean. You sold me oceans. In this song, Romance, you can manage the bass line, mostly on open strings, 3-fretted notes, that's it. The struggle was real, though. Consequently, this song is the only recorded evidence of my very brief career as a bass player. I'm walking away from you, turning the tree. We had hoped that I would also play the bass line on Loaded Up, but that clearly wasn't going to happen. I ended up playing a bass line on my bass clarinet. I think Philip layered in an actual bass track when he remastered the song years later, but you can still hear the bass clarinet contributing a sort of goofy, joyful vibe. The music program at Bennington was incredibly creative and inclusive back when I was a student. All music majors had to try our hand at composition, and not in the abstract. We had to write for specific performers. We had to learn to stay within the limits of what they and their instruments could reasonably manage. During my final year at Bennington, I took on my very first clarinet student, a high school sophomore named Maeve Richmond. For my final recital, I wrote some duets for us to play together. I wrote challenging lines for myself and simpler lines for Maeve that would allow her to focus on phrasing and expressing herself without having to worry too much about technique and accuracy. I don't teach clarinet anymore, but I sometimes still teach beginning singers, and I absolutely love it. But in retrospect, back when I was the beginner, when I was trying to learn how to play bass, my ego just couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the whole being a beginner thing at the time. It made me so uncomfortable that I just didn't practice very much or very well. As a voice teacher, I encourage my students of all levels to choose repertoire that will allow them to express themselves with abandon without having to worry about technique or accuracy. Even during my college days, I clearly appreciated the importance of that. But for some reason, I thought I was supposed to be able to catch up overnight on the bass, even though no one was expecting me to, except myself. The bass lines Philip gave me to play were designed with the same simplicity as the clarinet lines I gave Maeve, but they still needed a quality and consistency of practice that I just didn't have the patience for at the time. I'm very grateful to have developed it now because I am having an absolute blast learning the guitar. But back then, I gave up and I headed off to grad school and I became an exclusively classical performer, which I had actually never been before. Not only that, but eventually I gave up the clarinet and became exclusively a singer. I had been informed that if I wanted to be taken seriously as a classical singer, I shouldn't be seen to be wasting time on other genres or playing other instruments. Please take a moment to consider just how ridiculous that position is. And please don't listen to anyone who tries to tell you how or what you should be singing or playing. This type of classical bias is not quite as bad as it was back when I was in grad school, but it's still pretty bad.
Genres are a funny little concept, aren't they? In theory, they have a simple definition that's easy to understand. But in practice, well, some may feel confined.
That's the voice of Linda Martell from a track on Beyoncé's extraordinary new album, Cowboy Carter. I opened with the cowpunk track on Tender Skelters, so I hope you'll bear with me now as I talk a little bit about Cowboy Carter. Country is a powerful, versatile musical style. It influenced indie rock in the 80s. I find it riveting to listen to how country styles, motives, and harmonies are woven throughout Cowboy Carter now. Beyoncé can incorporate any stylistic influences she wishes, of course. Anyone can. A little bit of opera shows up on this album too, an excerpt from the familiar aria, Caro Country, beautifully integrated into the song Daughter. Cue the confusion and the pearl clutching from the opera fans. A pop singer appropriated their music and she sang it all wrong. I have some news for them, which is that Caro Country is simply not that amazing a composition. Nothing against Tommaso Giordani, but this is just a pretty tune with boilerplate lyrics. My love, you must believe me. My heart aches when we're apart. I'm faithful and I'm begging you, stop punishing me so cruelly. Literally the only reason that we are singing this admittedly very pretty tune 300 years after it was written is that voice teachers find the slow tempo, the simple, smooth, long lines of the melody, and the manageable range make this song really great for novice singers to work on. That's how it got into an anthology of Baroque songs and arias that we have all come to have a very conflicted relationship with. But Caro Country just isn't on the same level as many Baroque arias that have endured over the centuries. For example, another song that appears in the same anthology, Amarilli, mia bella, by Giulio Caccini. Believe in my love for you, and if you ever have doubts, take this arrow, pierce my chest, and see, written on my heart, Amarilli is my beloved. Now that's poetry. All which is to say that by incorporating excerpts of Caro Country in Daughter, Beyoncé has effectively elevated what is, in my opinion, a mediocre song. You can all relax now. It's amazing to be living in an era when we have access to so many musical genres. We can draw on such a vast array of influences when we make our own music. But I digress. I'm supposed to be promoting this album that I contributed to more than 30 years ago. I hope you'll all check out Tender Skelter, featuring the extraordinary songwriter, musician, and producer Philip Price, with yours truly on vocals, winds, and a little bit of bass. And definitely check out Winter Pills. If you appreciate Philip's music as much as I do, there will be so much for you to enjoy. If I hadn't been so uptight about getting everything right all at once on the bass, who knows? Maybe I would have been a rock performer instead of an opera singer. Or maybe I would have figured out all those years ago that there is no reason that you can't be both. You can just be yourself. You can sing and play anything you want. As the song goes, you can bring your plate to life and load it up.